Right, Max. So basically, I had Johnny Vedmore in my studio just a couple of weeks ago, and we had this epic long chat. And he, when we stopped recording, he sits back in his seat like this and goes, "Ahmed, that's probably the best chat I've ever given, ever. That was brilliant." I went, "Man, I'm so happy to hear that." And I'd probably say about 70% of the people who come in my studio would turn around and say that to me. And I'm like, "Are you just saying that?" And they go, no, seriously. You got so much out of me that like I've never really thought of before or haven't said. That was brilliant. And I think part of it is because I don't do interviews. I have chats. I have conversations. But every now and again, people will leave a message on Spotify or Rumble or whatever and go, "Doc, I love you, but you talk too much. Let your guest speak. Stop talking so much. Stop interrupting." And I'll go, "Okay." Or they go, "For an interview, you keep interrupting your guest." And I'm like, "I'm not doing an interview. I'm having a conversation. And it's through the conversation I get things out my guest." But I'm taking on board what they're saying. So I really want to say as little as possible in this podcast. I forgot to turn the heater on last night. It's absolutely freezing in the studio. I've got my jacket on. I'd love it if you just talk me through what is going on in our skies. What is this thing that everybody keeps talking about? Chemtrails, geostratospheric engineering or whatever it is. What the hell is going on? Is it a conspiracy? Is it a reality? Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? What is in the sky? Can you just start talking and don't stop? Because like I said, people keep complaining that I interrupt.
I've done 6 hours before, but I think, no, it will help to bounce backwards and forwards because it's such a complex issue. You can't really explain it all in a nutshell, but I'll give it a go. Basically, there is, without a doubt, a large-scale weather modification program and multiple programs actually at play right now. This is over 100 years in the making. In fact, probably the earliest contrails that were ever seen were probably side effects of weather modification experiments. A lot of people talk about contrails just being a natural phenomena. They often refer to the Second World War because the Second World War was the first time over Europe, and especially over from the UK, we saw a lot of aircraft contrails. But the thing is that you need to look into a little bit more deeply and understand that the Allies had a very, very serious problem during the Second World War. They wanted to bomb Germany. That was their main tactic to destroy Germany, was strategic, large-scale bombing. And when the Germans at the beginning were putting up quite a decent defense to the bombing attacks. It wasn't until about 1943 that the Americans came in with a large fleet of aircraft. But the problem was visibility. Because when the planes could be seen, it was easier for the Germans to respond and try and inflict damage to stop the Allies bombing them. Basically, they wanted to have fighters to protect the aircraft, but the fighters didn't have the same range. So they were limited how far they could fly with the strategic bombers to protect them. At some point, they had to turn around and come back because they were running out of fuel. So the problem was they needed cloud cover because cloud cover stopped the planes from being seen. Cloud cover is very, very important. So what started to happen was that lots of contrails started to be visible. And these contrails would have an effect in the atmosphere and they would create huge cloud decks. So basically there was a need, there was a danger of the planes being exposed and visible. They couldn't get the fighter protection, so they had to come up with a method. And of course, you can find lots of evidence to say about their concerns about the lack of cloud cover and how dangerous it was bombing without cloud cover. You won't find exactly a scientific document saying this is how we create contrails. But creating a contrail is actually not that difficult. You can change the fuel combustion rates to create more soot, so there's more particles going into you can add more sulfur into the fuel. And basically what happened was more contrails were formed, more clouds were created, and this was a great solution, or a bit of good fortune for the Allies bombing, because they had new techniques of targeting without the need to see the ground. They had radar systems. They had various different systems they developed. So the earliest systems were the Norden bomb site, which meant that you could see the ground visibly. As the war progressed and more flights were going and more cloud conditions were created, they needed other systems. So they had a system called G. Then that was improved, and they got another system called H2S, which was basically a radar system with a little television screen where they could see cities on the ground, and then they could accurately pinpoint their position so they could bomb like that. So it didn't matter whether it was cloudy. So basically what I'm saying is there's quite a lot of evidence to say that the contrails that were formed, another way contrails would be formed is through the injection of water, methanol, ADI, anti-detonation systems that gave them extra power.
So I just want to ask you something. That all makes sense. You're saying the bombers wanted cloud cover, but the cloud is behind them. That means a bunch of planes were going in front.
Yeah, the pathfinder
to make the clouds, and you would need a lot of them. And why were they not shot down?
Oh, well, planes were shot down. There was a risk. They lost many, many, many pilots and planes. This did happen. But the thing is, ahead of the bombers went the pathfinders, and the pathfinders wanted to be able to mark the route with flares. But the flares were much more effective if there were clouds, which is interesting because basically everything sort of favoured around actually having cloud cover. So the thing is, planes would go in advance of the bombers called pathfinders, RAF pathfinders. And therefore, they would already be creating contrails. But the contrails, they were bombing so frequently that the contrails could have been there creating clouds from days before. So it's only that, basically, you could do a bombing run. Maybe the conditions weren't correct to get the best cloud cover. But the next day, the cloud cover is going to still be there from the previous bombing raids. So it's a calculated risk. They couldn't have fighter cover, and they were bombing with huge numbers of planes, sometimes 1,000 planes. So they were creating a heck of a lot of contrails. And also there are other indicators, like, for example, they had to create a method to clear fog from the airports where they were leaving in the UK, because they were having sudden and unexpected fogs. In my mind, these were created because of all exhaust from the aircraft, and from the water detonation, the injection, which they needed for taking off, war emergency power. So basically, this was creating fogs, and they needed to get rid of it, and it was unexpected, which is another indicator that something was going on with the engines to create the fog, because basically clouds in the sky is fog up high. So the thing is, it was weather modification was going on long before this. And weather modification was primarily either for profit, because they wanted more crops or whatever, but it was primarily for warfare, weather modification. And it's an old endeavour, the problem of weather control. You had the Royal Society from the UK, which is basically the preeminent scientific body where all of the science is kind of collated and processed, and it's so internationally. They were working on weather modification in the mid-19th centuries. Of course, these efforts were going on in multiple locations. So, but there's no actual written evidence that weather modification was ever used during the Second World War. It's basically, the idea is weather modification got started just after the Second World War. But it's completely not true.
Okay, so I mean, there is actually a convention, Environmental Modification Convention, which is to stop weather warfare, techniques such as cloud seeding for military purposes, and they passed that in 1977. And I think it was mainly about Vietnam. It was like the US was using weather modification.
Yeah, it was called Operation Popeye. And what they were doing was extending the monsoon season. So the idea being is they would deny the enemy the logistical supplies. So basically, they didn't have tarmacked roads in Vietnam. They had mud tracks. They had dirt tracks. So if they could extend the monsoon seasons, which they did by up to 40 days, it would mean that they would have difficulty with supplies, logistics, basically. So that was their theory. It was also to damage crop production.
So can I just show you something?
Yeah.
So basically, weather modification, it says, a popular belief in Northern Europe was that shooting prevents hail, which thus caused many agricultural towns to fire cannons without ammunition. Veterans of the 7 Years' War, Napoleonic Wars, and American Civil War reported that rain fell after every large battle. After their stories were collected in War and Weather, the United States Department of War in the late 19th century purchased $9,000 of gunpowder and explosives to detonate them in Texas in hopes of condensing water vapor into rain. The results of the test were inconclusive. And then cloud busting in the 50s. So, yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, one thing I have noticed is that they always say, we're not sure if it works. The statistical analysis doesn't necessarily prove it, but it depends on where you look. That's the general outlook is, yes, we're researching it. Yes, we're experimenting with it, but we're not 100% certain if it works. That's even back in the old days. But you had people like James Espy that was in 1880s. He was creating rain successfully.
What was his name?
Espy, Espy. I think his name. Yeah, I think his name was James. I might be wrong on his first name. But you look into the history of weather modification, it's one of the first references generally used, where he was using explosive devices as well. And he was successful creating it. Now, the problem is, every time they had successes in the past and they publicised what they were doing, they would be subjected to lawsuits because often, 1834, there you go, you can see it. The problem is, if you damage someone's property by heavy rainfall, then you're liable. So this has always been this constant element of, first of all, there's the military element where they don't want it to become public, their capabilities. And second of all, there's what damage did we cause, and we don't want the liability. So you can understand why they try to play it down all the time. And this has been an ongoing thing. For example, leaping forward to 1952, in the UK, there was something called the Lynmouth disaster, where 35 people were killed and a small village of Lynmouth was washed away, basically. And they tried to say at the time, and they actually still do to this day, say that it was a natural disaster. But it has come out that it was part of something called Operation Cumulus, which is experimental weather modification by the UK government or British military. They still tried to deny it because they would be culpable for the damages they caused. 35 people died.
Well, apparently it's a conspiracy theory. But if we go back to that James Espy, it's fascinating. He was a U.S. meteorologist, and he developed a convection theory of storms. And he was working with the American Philosophical Society, as well as the French and British Royal Society. Yeah. And he was known as a storm king. And he worked, trying to make rain. And he talked about, burning the forest to make rain, probably the earliest idea for climate engineering. So that's fascinating. And, the idea of weather and war does make sense, because if you think about it, we've all heard about the Napoleonic adventure to try and wage war against Russia, and then the winter and how it decimated the Napoleonic army, and then the Russians picked them off from the back as they were retreating. We know about Germany and its disastrous war in Russia, again, the winter in Russia, and being bogged down in the rain and the transport and the infrastructure and the supply lines being. So war definitely hinges on what the weather's like. Dry, sunny conditions, or boggy where nothing can move, or snow and cold where people die off. It's huge. So I get all that. That makes complete sense. And I also get that the Army and the Navy and whatever Air Force wouldn't want to be open about it, because then people will be like, what the heck? What have you done to us? And it's known that the Army does experiment on us. And in America and Britain, we know that they've put bacteria in the sky, and then they go wonder what happens to the people if they get infected. So these covert experiments and operations do happen, and that's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy reality. It's conspiracy reality. Right, okay. So we've got that. Now, can we move on to what are these contrails? So just to clarify, you get water condensation, but the water, cloud seeding, means it condenses around something, it has to condense it, and that's normally a particulate.
Yes.
Dust, metal, something.
Metal.
Can you expand more on the different types of contrails? And, people want to understand, why is there so much of it now? How are they doing it? Is it aeroplanes full of vats and tanks? Is it just normal jetliners with altered fuel? Do the pilots know? Do they not know? Who's doing it? How much money is spent doing it? Like, what is going on? Someone said to me recently, they're putting all this metal and stuff, and it reflects laser lights, and they're getting topographical measurements and real-time data. I mean, I just don't know what is going on and what is in it. We talk about heavy metals and stuff. What's going on? Can you just really get into that now?
Okay, well, the thing is, the technology with aircraft has been constantly changing the entire time since they've been able to fly. And it's still happening to this day. The contrails generally are thought to be hot vapor from the combustion of the fuel. Condensation nuclei in the exhaust is soot, sulfur, metals. So that is why it would form. So if the atmosphere at the right altitude had the right conditions, it was supersaturated to ice, there was a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. The idea is that when the contrail will form under these correct conditions. But the thing is, contrails, they can be created and they can be suppressed. There's lots of evidence for that. There's even lots of scientific studies where they adapt a plane to be able to deliberately create a contrail. Where I've seen two planes side by side at the same altitude in a scientific study, where one plane is not creating a contrail and the other plane is, and they're studying it. The thing is, this has been going on for decades and decades and decades, so their understanding of it is far more sophisticated than it was in the early days. Why they would want to create contrails is quite easy, really, because basically, if you can control the world's cloud layer, you can ultimately create a worldwide weather control. Now, when they say weather control, they don't mean that, right, I want it to rain over there, exactly there right now, let's flick a switch. It doesn't quite work like that. It's far more sophisticated and complex. But basically, they can, if you have a region where it's supersaturated, it's ideal conditions to create a contrail, there are many, many, many patents on suppressing a contrail. So if you can suppress a contrail, that means you can also stop that suppression happening and allow it to be formed. So what you've got then is a system for placing a contrail. So this is the vital part of it. They want clouds where they decide they want clouds. So they use all their systems, whether it's satellite observation of humidity in the atmosphere, to tell them where these areas are, or all the different devices they've got to tell them whether or not a contrail is beginning to form on the planes. They've got sensors on the planes, whether it's lasers, video cameras, all kinds of different systems. There literally are scores and scores of systems for monitoring contrail development. So they have all the technology to know if a contrail will be formed. And there are scores of patents for suppressing a contrail. So basically what I'm saying is you have all the scientific apparatus necessary that's almost standardized on aircraft anyway, so that they can monitor contrails and they can place them. And the reason it's happening is because when you have a lot of contrails in the sky, well, first of all, you're making clouds. But contrails are also electrically charged, and that charge can be altered. And when you have you could basically change weather fronts by changing the electrical field in the atmosphere. I mean, there's other reason for it as well, because they might want to create rain, which they can do. They might want to create droughts, which they can do. They might want to change the weather somewhere else by altering the weather in one region. You can basically have a forecast where it's 10 days of sunshine, and then you'll see an awful lot of contrails form one day, and the next day it's all cloudy, and it might even start raining. But the forecast said it was going to be dry for the next 10 days. So they have this ability to place contrails, and it's important for them to be able to, their whole goal is to be able to control the weather, but they want to do it without anyone realizing. They want plausible deniability, because basically the military-industrial complex, right from the beginning of the Second World War, controls pretty much all airplane development and engine development and all scientific apparatus and everything to do with it. It's all really military-industrial complex stuff, even today. All of it. Even the fuel supplies are owned by these companies that are linked to the military-industrial complex. And because basically controlling the weather allows them to con the public into believing there's a climate change problem that must be addressed. Or they even call it a climate change crisis. That was the one from the Club of Rome. They started that up recently, a few years ago now. So the reason that they use contrails is contrails have lots of complicated different effects. Like, for example, contrails can create warming. They can create cooling, depending on the volume of them, how opaque the clouds become. If they create a really dense cloud cover, then they'll block the sun from coming through and it will cool down. But if it's only partially covered, and you've only got you can still see the sky, but you can see all the trails, then those trails will actually be warming the atmosphere, because the sun can come through, the solar radiation can come through, and it's intensified by the contrails, because the contrails are filled with quasi-spherical ice crystals. Now, spherical ice crystals have an interesting effect. There's something called Me radiation, which is spelled IE. And this is one of the ways that light will forward scatter. That means the energy of the sun will be intensified when it hits a spherical ice crystal. So when you've got lots of contrails in the sky and they're basically filled with spherical ice crystals, then when the solar radiation is hitting that, it's actually intensifying it by up to 1.5 times, which is why we're getting more UV damage to things. And it's very simple experiment to just test it for yourself, is to stand on the shade on a sunny day when there's lots of contrails in the sky and step out into the sun, and you'll feel it burning you.
This is from Imperial University. Study on planet warming contrails, a spanner in the works for the aviation industry. So you're right, it can actually heat up as well.
Also traps radiation, infrared radiation coming from the surface of the Earth back, so it's not escaping. And of course, that leads in nicely, apart from the effects of conning you that we've got global warming due to CO2, man-made CO2, which is obviously, if you begin to look into the idea of man-made CO2 actually creating any warming, there's no empirical evidence for it, whatever. It's just purely models. And actually, it's almost farcical, because CO2 is so important to life on the planet. But it's a useful mechanism that they're all tied to push forward, to steamroll all the policies that they want to make. So basically, global warming may or may not be happening. We know they fudge the data all the time. They're completely despicable with the truth. They really are dishonest. That, like, for example, they might have a temperature monitoring station at Heathrow Airport. Where it's not truly representative. They rarely even include the idea of the island heat effect of cities, and the fact that that's not representative of the true temperature data, but that's where a lot of them are.
Well, if you look at this, for the last 500 million years, and this is from the Smithsonian Institute, it's not some, it's a reputable place, apparently. For much of the last 500 million years, it's been much warmer than it is now. And, this is where it is blue. I mean, for much of the history of Earth, there's been no polar ice caps. And we're down here. In the far right, if you look, we're below the mean. We're below the mean temperature. And, a bit of global warming would be a good thing, wouldn't it? I mean, things grow. Things grow when it's warm.
A paper, I think it's called How Global Warming Would Be a Boon for Mankind. And in this paper, they talk about basically a little historical references to the medieval warm period, the Roman age, because it was warmer in the Roman period. It was warmer in ancient Egypt, to it with the Egyptian age prior to that, thousands of years before that. And there's the optimum Holocene. Whenever it's been warmer, mankind has flourished, more plants grow, crops can actually be grown at higher altitudes, where today it might be too cold. So basically, you get more food. Everyone has a much nicer time of life, and actually warming, if CO2 doesn't drive climate change, by the way, it follows climate change. So when it gets warmer, more plants are growing, more plankton in the ocean is growing, and that's where the CO2 is coming from, the predominant part of CO2. The effect of man's CO2 is so minuscule, it's almost tragic that they can try and push this. It's ridiculous, because basically there's 0.004% of CO2 in the atmosphere, and only 5% of that is produced by mankind. It's an absolute minuscule amount that's just ridiculous. However, there's an awful lot of money to be made, and a huge transition in the way society lives is their goal. So I would say that contrails, weather-altering contrails, are just a part. It's not the sole motivation. It's a useful part they developed over many decades in order to get this global warming scam going, to implement what they call the United Nations Agenda 21, which is actually the agenda for the 21st century, where they want to basically standardize all nations, end sovereignty of all nations, and to take control of all land and resources everywhere on the planet. And this will be done through a public-private partnership, where that's fascism. So whenever you hear Klaus Schwab talking about public-private partnerships and everything else, that is actually one of the definitions of is corporations and government. That is fascism, according to Mussolini.
Okay. Yeah. Can I ask you something? So, look, it was going to be, I think, in my head, a chat about contrails and chemtrails, but we might as well just talk about weather modification. Let's make this podcast about weather modification. So basically, chemtrails has got a very bad name attached to it. It's like an anti-vaxxer. If you mention chemtrails, you're a crazy loon. Should we just stick to contrails?
Well, I've been to some climate engineering conferences, and when you want to speak with scientists, although I did at the Berlin Climate Engineering Conference in 2014, I was lucky enough to have the opening question at the conference. You do have to say who you are. And I did actually say that I represent people concerned about chemtrails. But the thing is, you can't really, it's like a pitfall. basically. If you use that term, of course it's a colloquial term. A lot of people use it because, many people don't even understand about contrails really anyway, but they are weather altering. That's the key part. So when I talk to the climate scientists, whether it was at the Cambridge Solar Radiation Management Conference in 2015, I will use the term contrails. Yeah, that's where I was. I think you'll find my name at the back of that.
2014 Critical Global Discussions, Climate Engineering Conference 2014. So tell me something. How have you got an interest in this? Why were you at this conference? Like, what is your background and your expertise?
Well, as I said when I was at Washington, D.C. at the EPA testifying, I am not a scientist. I'm a builder. I'm a construction worker. I'm a bricklayer. I'm a guy that's worked outside all his life. And I've seen a change in what's going on in the sky. And when I came to live in southwest France, I had been to France on numerous occasions in the past, and it was like, I remember all the blue skies, what's going on? And that prompted me, I think in about 2010, 2011, to start looking into what was going on in the sky. And I came across chemtrails, contrails, and I realised when I was looking at the chemtrail issue that there were lots and lots of problems with it, but there were elements of fact. So I started to dig, and I became quite obsessed with it, really, and just spent an awful lot of time reading scientific and historical documents to try and fathom it all out. So that is how I got into it. And I started making YouTube videos, and then I started going on Facebook. Then I started speaking. I was invited to speak at conferences about chemtrails. I did a tour of the UK, the south of the UK in my van, speaking at conferences, I think 7 in total. And then I thought I should go to a real conference, a conference with the scientists. I want to talk to these people. So what was interesting about that Berlin conference, it was over 4 days, and I learned an awful lot about all the different possibilities they have. Yeah, that was me.
I've just found you at the back. Yeah. Anyway, carry on. Keep going.
What was interesting about that was at the very, very beginning, it was a 4-day conference. And they stated right at the beginning that they wanted, at the end of the conference, to be able to create the Berlin Declaration. And the declaration was to be about the importance of using climate engineering or geoengineering to combat global warming. That's very much paraphrasing. So basically the 4-day conference went on. There were lots of different sessions. There were lots of talking going on with people in between the sessions. I took part in some of them. I was on the panel for the geoengineering as a weapon. There were many, many different sessions. But at the end of it, they had to sadly announce that the Berlin Declaration wasn't going, nobody wanted to sign it, or very few wanted to sign it. They basically wanted, at the end of this conference, for all the members to be convinced that this was a very good declaration, and basically we all think that you should be able to do geoengineering. But I was talking to a guy, an Australian guy, who's an author, covers climate change, Clive Hamilton, and he said to me, he goes, "Hey, you guys have caused a bit of a storm, and because of you, that Berlin Declaration did not get completed, did not get signed." Not just me. There were other people there from the chemtrail community, because I inspired a few other people wanted to join along with me, which was also good. There was Terry Lawton, Harry Rhodes, Ian Simpson. There was a lady, I can't remember the name, a Spanish lady, and an Austrian guy. So between us all, we were able to go to the different plenary sessions, go talk as widely as possible. And it was great because we had a huge impact. We were asking pertinent questions. We were basically kind of destabilizing their Delphi techniques. There's this Delphi technique where there's a preordained outcome for a discussion. So we actually were able to, so it was quite successful in my opinion, at least. It was well worth doing. And it was also really interesting talking to all the different climate scientists.
I want to sharpen up in my head what you're saying. So basically, they created this conference, and what they wanted was a declaration at the end to say, you know what, we should manipulate the weather for climate. And then the Delphi technique is like, how much should we manipulate by? Who should be involved? You know, you're framing everything around the assumption that this is a given, and now we're just going to go into the details of it. It's not like, should we even do this? Is that right or not? You straight away create a little Overton window box in which all the discussion is going to be in that. You've already agreed on something, and you came along and you guys went, no, I don't think we should do this. Is that right?
Kind of, yeah. Because it was a multidisciplinary conference. There weren't all just climate scientists. There were a lot of climate scientists there, all the big names. But there were people from all different backgrounds, like me, for example. I'm certainly not a climate scientist, so I feel like I could probably go for it. Yeah, ultimately, all of these conferences have framing is a really important word, what you're saying there. But basically, yeah, it's almost like a process just to confirm what they've already got planned, you know, with people.
And can I just double check? These climate scientists, they're not really scientists. They don't have a physical background. They don't have like an engineering background. These are just people who have just jumped on the bandwagon wanting grants and research money and to build a name. Am I right? A lot of them? Or are they genuine scientists?
Well, I would say that there's a core group who steer everything. I mean, I must say, before, you know, I don't think all climate scientists are kind of corrupt and in on it, if you like. Actually, I think most of them are well-meaning people who really do care about what's going on the planet. But they're just being fed misinformation by a core group who are linked with, which is FISOR. But there's countless things he's involved in. There is a core group of climate scientists, and, you know, they are corrupt. For example, there was something called the Climate Gate scandals. There were 3 of them back in, I think, 2009. The leading climate scientists at the Anglia University Climate, but basically they were fudging the data. They were because there was no global warming. They were really perplexed. What can we do to hide the fact there is no global warming? Because it's going against the narrative. And there were all these emails that were hacked and released because somebody obviously of good conscience must have come across all this and thought it was intolerable, and the public needed to know.
The Climate Gain scandal began in 2009 when hackers stole thousands of emails and documents from the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia. I remember that. The stolen data was then used to undermine public confidence in the climate change science.
This should have stopped climate change in its tracks, realistically. But it was glossed over and it was business as usual. Because the whole climate change agenda is the most important vehicle to create one world government, or governance, as they prefer to say, one world governance.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like the Germans still got their Berlin, by the way, Declaration on Climate Justice a few years later. I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but they came out with something.
Yeah, funny enough, I wasn't able to go to the next one in 2017.
Why was that?
I couldn't go through their system, so obviously there must have been some kind of black mark against my name at that stage.
Right. Okay. Fine. So there's definitely something going on. Stick with before we talk about other weather modifications. What are on in these contrails, chemtrails? I hear things like aluminium, heavy metals, barium, strontium. Why are they putting all this poison? Aluminium's the 3rd most abundant element in the world, but it's locked up in the Earth's crust. And it's only been 150 years that it's been released from the crust, where it's heavily bonded to silica. And so for all of history, aluminium hasn't been exposed to any biological plants or animals. Physiologically, you know, aluminium isn't in any of our natural systems. Aluminium is cytotoxic. It's a poison. It's deadly. Now, If they're putting aluminium into our skies, don't they know that they're poisoning the soil and the earth and the plants and all of us?
Yes, they do. And they prepared for this quite some time ago, actually. They have a huge patent list of aluminium resistant crops and the various different plants, actually. Aluminium resistant. They are using aluminium in the fuel, although if you'd have looked at this 10 years ago, it would have been quite hard to find it unless it was like in military analysis of jet fuels, because it creates extra power, basically, to put it in for military applications. But these days, they just simply put it in sustainable jet fuels. So this whole drive to move away from fossil fuels has given them carte blanche to develop other types of fuels from plant-based sources. But they use aluminium nanoparticles in the mix to increase combustion to make it better. So it's got to go somewhere once it's combusted, and it's going out into the exhaust plume. Then it's going out into the atmosphere. And the reason, if you look at people like David Keith, he's been a proponent of using aluminium oxide as part of his geoengineering strategy to spray these particles into the atmosphere so it would reflect away the sun. Because one of their methods of geoengineering is solar radiation management, which basically involves in putting particles in the atmosphere to reflect away the sunlight. There's an article about accidentally geoengineering the sky. That's in reference to all the effects of the contrails. But realistically, actually, when I was at the climate change conference...
Max, this line is so bad. You keep freezing. Like, you've frozen about 10 times, and I'm really struggling to follow this conversation. I'm going to stop it. Right, I've transferred it onto low data mode. What that means is you can't see me and I can't see you, and you can't see the screen that I'm sharing. But hopefully you won't freeze and we won't have that interruption. But if you stop talking, you need to tell me, because I can't tell because I can't see you. But what I'm doing is I'm sharing a screen that shows aluminium particles can improve the combustion of alternative jet fuels, including biojet fuels. Biojet fuels that are made from organic materials like oils, fats, and biomass to reduce the need for petroleum-based fuels. And then aluminium particles increase the furnace temperature and can improve the burn rate. So you're 100% right. Sustainable aviation fuel and using aluminium. So maybe it's not a conspiracy that they're genuinely trying to poison humanity and kill us all off. Maybe they're just so indoctrinated into this whole climate BS and sustainability BS. They're using this biofuel and adding aluminium and not realizing the huge consequences of doing so. Am I right?
Organisations and groups that are investing and experimenting with these fuels, or any other aspect of climate change, are ultimately it's about making money. If you're the one that can you imagine how much fuel is used by aviation? If you are the company that cracks it, that makes a really good, reliable alternative biofuel that is apparently better for the environment. Don't forget, all these plants have to be grown, have to be harvested, have to be processed before you get it. I mean, I'm not even certain they're really climate neutral. In fact, I think they're just denying food. You know, the excuse of using biofuel as an alternative to kerosene, which they use in Jet A1, seems to me a misuse of the land when they should be growing food instead, or planting trees or whatever. It doesn't matter. But if you were the one who cracked that code, who got the best fuel in the world, then you're going to make billions and billions. So they're their motivation. They always worry about the health effects at a later date. You know, you have to prove the health effects. Think of the tobacco problem they had years ago, how many years and years and years it takes to actually prove it categorically. There's no other influence, you know. So they can easily drag it out for years and years and years, making billions, billions, billions. So do they worry about health concerns? I don't think so. They worry about it when it becomes legislation. When they worry about it when they have to go to court over it.
You're frozen again. I'm going to talk anyway. So basically, yeah, that makes complete sense. And it also makes sense, why they would be poisoning the skies when it affects them as well. It's just about money and greed. And it's not a conspiracy. They're literally just burning it in the fuel. So these pictures that I've seen of planes with tanks and stuff like that, they're not really spraying that, are they? It's just in the commercial jet fuel. Am I right?
Those pictures have been deliberately put out there as misinformation to embarrass people in a way, because people will look at those and go, bloody hell, yeah, look at that, they must be doing it, look at those tanks and the planes. And actually they're ballast tanks. They're used as part of testing the planes and everything else. There's plausible explanations for that, but people can be fooled when they're hungry for information or evidence.
Okay, the next one is, I've seen people put on social media plane flight paths, and it's like a grid backwards and forwards, and they go, see, look what they're doing. Is that just training exercises, or are they crop dusting, or what's that all about? Or is that some weird thing that they're spraying in the sky?
Well, first of all, I'd like to see that image you're referring to, so I know. Crop dusting would only be done at very, very low level. We're talking like 100 feet, 100 meters above the ground, crop dusting. So it wouldn't be crop dusting. You do get grids in the atmosphere because of the planes flying in all different directions. And this is part of these contrails that are formed in these huge grid patterns also alter the electrical state of the atmosphere. This is part of the weather modification element. Once you understand that all clouds have got electricity in them, and contrails are clouds, when you start creating a massive grid in the atmosphere, and there are lots of patents and lots of scientific studies into this to confirm what I'm saying. I mean, this is another side of the whole contrail investigation, chemtrail investigation, that people don't really look at. It's how the effects they're having on the atmosphere and what they're doing. This is why placement is so important as part of a large-scale weather modification program. Why they want to place contrails where they do, because they have effects like they can create drought, they can create floods, they can create rain, they can create cloud cover, they change the electrical state of the atmosphere. If you can coordinate changing electrical states in the atmosphere, you can coordinate the weather.
Yeah, Max, I missed 80% of what you just said. You're still freezing even on the low data mode. Have you got an actual hard Ethernet internet connection you can connect to, or better reception somewhere? I'm really right, folks. We're back again. Sorry for all the interruptions. It's just been tricky. It might be Max's old computer. Max, well done for trying, though. Thank you. Have we covered everything that needs to be talked about? Chemtrails and contrails?
Not necessarily. Well, there is a paper from 1970, which you probably could pull up. It's called On the Possibility of Weather Modification by Aircraft Contrails by Wallace B. McRae.
On the possibility of what, sorry?
On the Possibility of Weather Modification by Aircraft Contrails.
Okay.
By Wallace B. McRae, 1970. It's a fairly short paper. In a nutshell, what he's stating is that, in his opinion, in his studies, that the ice crystals that are formed in contrails are sufficient to act as cloud condensation nuclei for cloud seeding. The ice crystals can survive falling out of an old contrail and start seeding the cloud deck below. And it can obviously begin to affect climate, which he talks about in this paper. I like this paper because basically it links weather modification with contrails. It also talks about how it could change the climate. Yeah, so it's a relatively short paper, but it raises a lot of questions. It's very important. Also, another paper.
Can I just read this, please? So this is from the paper. I'll put it in the show notes. The conclusions reached as a result of the above discussions are that nearly all results that can be produced by seeding with ice crystals are in fact being produced as a result of routine airline operations, that the effectiveness of ice crystals as nuclei over such a wide range of meteorological conditions and the scale on which they are being deposited make it likely that they are affecting precipitation to a much greater extent than our present deliberate seeding operations. Although the deliberate operations may still show more net results because of the selection of situations suitable for seeding. Wow. So it's recognizing that just normal airlines are causing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
In conclusion, it should be stated that if contrails are affecting the weather, it is not necessarily for the worse, although if there is any considerable change, it is sure to make someone unhappy. The Russians might well be pleased with an ice-free Arctic Ocean, but if it leads to a major glaciation in central Canada, it is unlikely that the Canadians and Americans would regard it as favorable. I mean, that's definitely weather modification and climate at a local level, if not on a global scale.
I sent you a little clip of a CNN news report from 1980.
All right. Okay. And what was that about?
It's about the effects of contrails. It was a report.
Okay. Let's play it. I've got it. Let's play it.
It's 49 seconds. It's not very long.
Yeah. And I'm a tech whiz. I get these things done quickly. Right.
On clear days, you can often see long white lines being traced high in the sky. They are contrails of jet aircraft, actually long, slender clouds. Weathermen are finding them especially fascinating because a theory is being developed that those long white lines may be changing our weather for the better. Details from Roger O'Neill.
The exhaust from jet engines, usually seen as long, thin trails of white clouds behind high-flying jet airplanes, may be a big reason why there are 30 fewer days of sunshine a year in the Midwest now than there were in 1900. The daily range between high and low temperatures has also narrowed. Weather researchers studying cloud cover in 10 Midwestern states found a sharp increase in cloudiness with the increase in commercial jet travel. Particularly in the main east-west jet corridor, there were even more clouds. A jet produces a contrail, or cloud, because its exhaust consists primarily of water vapor.
In the absence of natural clouds, given the correct atmospheric conditions, jet aircraft in high frequency can almost completely cover the atmosphere, visible atmosphere, with clouds.
Simonin says unlike most changes in the atmosphere caused by man, this one is beneficial. Clouds help farmers in the Midwest by blocking the sun. Temperature extremes can damage plants and speed up the evaporation of soil moisture. In the winter, city people benefit because clouds act as a blanket, preventing warm air from escaping into the atmosphere.
No one is trying to make clouds now using jet engines, but this study suggests that jet travel is inadvertently making our days more cloudy. And someday, weather researchers may be able to use jets on purpose to change our weather. Roger O'Neill, NBC News, Champaign, Illinois.
Wow. So based on that, you know, as a kid in the 1980s, I didn't see these trails, chemtrails in the sky. Is it simply the fact that there's more planes in the sky and a different fuel mixture, and that's why we're seeing all these grids and crisscrossing? Is it simple as that? I mean, there's no grand conspiracy. That is it, literally that?
Well, that's certainly a big part of it, that there has been an increase in air traffic. There's no question about that is the case. And if you think about it, they encouraged that to happen. If you remember in the 70s, how they started having adverts for flying away on your holidays, where people, when we were younger, they actually didn't even go abroad. You know, that's been made to become popular. So they've encouraged the use in the increase in air traffic. As I said before, if you have the ability to suppress a contrail, then you have the ability to place a contrail. So, and you know, there are reports on saying that the contrail problem is accidental geoengineering. I was at this Cambridge University Solar Radiation Management Conference in 2015. I spoke with a scientist there called Dr. Stephen Salter, and asked him a question because at the time I had been analysing photos from the early TIROS satellites, which went up in the 60s. I was querying, well, I asked him, because he's quite an elderly scientist, doctor. He's died now, actually. But why is it on the early images of the TIROS satellites there are no ship tracks? And it's not until 1967-68 tracks become visible from the photographs from the satellites. He said, well, that's quite easy to explain, actually. In the US, there was something called the US Clean Air Act, and they were concerned about smog in all the cities from car exhausts and everything else. And they found that there were high contents of sulfur in the automobile fuel. So they limited how much sulfur content there would be in the fuel. But that was only limited to the cars, and there was no restrictions on ship fuel or aviation fuel. So he actually said they put the sulfur in there instead.
Oh.
Because there were no limitations on that. But he actually said, and then they put it in that fuel instead. So they wanted the sulfur in the fuel. They want they didn't just keep it limited. We want cleaner air. You see, in my opinion, when I was looking to try and find out if there was any patents or documents about deliberately forming contrails during the war, what I did come across was a guy called Vincent Schaefer and Langmuir, which are very, very key figures, along with Bernard Vonnegut, in weather modification. But they were working during the war. And one of the things they worked on was how to create extremely dense fogs. Funny thing happened when in 1943 in LA, they had a huge dense fog event, which they began the story of smog. They had that in the UK as well. They used to call it the pea supers. That was going on in the 50s at the same time. So I actually believe that the climate change agenda had already been formulated before the war. And it's all part of it, that basically they were using sulfur deliberately to create changes to the atmosphere, whether it be to create smog, whether it be to create contrails, whether it to affect ship tracks, because ship tracks are one of the biggest sources of cloud generation as well. But it's fascinating that because I was at this conference, I was able to speak to one of the more senior scientists and ask him a question in a way that, didn't feel uncomfortable to him. He opened up and just told me that they did put the sulfur. Okay, they had the US Clean Air Act, which restricted the amount of sulfur in automobile fuel, but there were no restrictions on marine or aviation, so they put it in there. So the fact that they came across a restriction for the amount of sulfur they could have, but they still wanted the sulfur in the atmosphere. So because this is the thing also that people don't understand. Right up until the 1970s, scientific experiments or endeavours for climate change was to actually create global warming. That is what they wanted to do, because if you look at right up until the 1970s, all of the potential schemes, experiments, they weren't about trying to stop global warming. They were about trying to create global warming, because global warming would mean that they could melt the Arctic, the huge land masses that are covered in ice or suffer terrible winters. They thought they could be able to gain that territory or exploit the resources in that territory. So that's been actually the goal for over 100 years, is deliberately to melt the Arctic. So I think that the sulfur that they were deliberately putting in the atmosphere to increase cloudiness, to block the sun from to get into the Arctic, is an effort to melt the Arctic sea ice, which of course they haven't been able to do, which they constantly lie about the amount of sea ice. The sea ice, it does vary, but it's no different now to what it was 30 years ago.
Okay, Max, what about weather modification in terms of like redirecting hurricanes and stuff? So last year we saw record hurricanes in the States, these severe storms flooding the Appalachian Mountains. I'm mispronouncing it. But some people say like, oh, that's, it was deliberate. They want to clear these towns. They want to destroy them. They want to mine or something, these places.
Lithium, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, is this real? Can they modify trajectories of hurricanes? I mean, with seeding or HARP or whatever like that?
Well, first of all, when you start to read into their documentation, they'll always say it's inconclusive, we don't know if it works. There's always the plausible deniability because of all the damage that they would cause or all the liability and culpability they would be subjected to. However, the first time they ever tried deliberately to steer a hurricane was in 1947. That was by cloud seeding, and that was part of Project Cirrus. They targeted a hurricane that was developing. They seeded it. It immediately began to change direction, but made landfall in the US and caused loads of damage. So they said, well, it's inconclusive whether or not we can steer a hurricane. Then following Project Cirrus, they had Project Storm Fury, which was quite a long-running hurricane experimental program to see if they could control hurricanes. I think it lasted about 40 years. And again, inconclusive, we don't know. But it's very interesting. They appear to be able to steer it by seeding it. That seems to be quite the case. And there's also Project HAMP, which is another one. It's been a very, very long-term endeavour to know if they can steer hurricanes. But they'll always say it's inconclusive. But very strangely, they appear to change direction fortuitously or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, for someone's goals, whatever that might be, whether it's to destroy New Orleans, whether it's to clear an area of people so that they could mine lithium. I don't know. In my opinion, they can definitely steer hurricanes.
Well, because the thing is, lithium is important for electric batteries, and everything's electric now.
Yeah.
And so these lithium batteries are really important, and they want to get security, because a lot of it they're mining from other countries and China. And if it can be at home, that's a huge boom for them. And if there's people in the way, you need to get rid of them. I mean, like a lot of what's going on in California and the LA fires and Maui, it's just all bizarre. You just wonder, is there a shaping hand behind all of this? They want to clear the land and move people out and then build. I mean, it's not unknown. I mean, some people are saying even the fire of London was that because,
yes.
After the fire of London, they basically all these people were just moved out, and then you built the city of London, the financial city of London. It was just very, it was very convenient. So I think there's a historical precedent, of using fires and, to clear people out the way. And if you can engineer the weather similarly, I don't put it past them.
Well,
I think,
let's face it, they will do. The people at the very, very top, they don't ask for permission. They just do it. Things happen and they never ask our permission. They just go ahead. And this whole thing about climate change is really a psychological operation to prepare the populations to accept the changes they want to inflict on people. The weather side of it, it's almost incidental in a way, because the whole climate change issue is not really about facts anymore. It's not really about what's happening. It's about what's being implemented.
Absolutely. I think it all ties in, and, wherever you go, whether you want to talk about chemtrails or hurricanes and everything, I mean, it's all about this climate change agenda, and it doesn't matter what's real or not. They use it as a weapon to explain away what they do, whether it's raising the taxes or charging us more, or implementing ULEZ, or implementing 15-minute cities, or restricting our quality of life, or putting up wind farms and spending taxpayers' money on subsidies for people to put up solar panels, and people are profiting. I think there's a whole industry of people profiting from this climate agenda.
It's trillions, Ahmed. It's trillions.
Trillions, and not only do they make a lot of money, but they get to inflict a lot of control mechanisms, which consolidates their power and strips away even more power from us. if we try and resist or fight back, then you get the label of, are you a climate change denier? Do you want to kill the planet? You know, it's like saying, are you an anti-vaxxer? What, you don't want to have a vaccine? You're not pro-science? You're anti-health? You're a baby killer? Like, you're dangerous? You're a threat to society? You evil, selfish person? Oh my God, you're questioning ethnic cleansing and genocide? You anti-Semite? You horrible, despicable Hitler? You know, they've weaponized words to shut down criticism and dialogue. That's what they've done a great job of. And the examples I've given they're all the same. You know, you can't have a rational debate about anything because it's so topical and so emotive. You just have to shut up. You have to shut up.
Yeah, but interestingly, I do think that the amount of effort they're putting in to railroad all their different agendas, all the behavioural science, the nudge units, everything they use indicates to me it's not all in the bag. It's not like guaranteed. And they're making a lot of effort to convince people because ultimately, although people don't realise it, do have power. And especially if they can get past their differences and unify and all agree, then the populations of the various different nations can change things, you know, but they've got to have all their different mechanisms of dividing society, divide and rule, which are very effective. You know, the fact that they use all these devices to slur people shows you that they're not even open to debate, which is why in the chemtrail arena there was so much different information and things, just to make sure that people couldn't stay on the same page. So much bickering that goes on, so many different issues. It's a microcosm of what they do everywhere.
Everywhere. So can I tell you something about, what, have you seen the movie Frankensky? I haven't. Have you seen it yet? The documentary Frankensky?
I think I've seen clips of it. I haven't watched it end to end. Sorry to change something, but that documentary that I was a part of, Unconventional Grey, which was the third in a series from Michael Murphy, who started with What in the World Are They Spraying? The second one being Why in the World Are They Spraying? The third one being Unconventional Grey. I think that Unconventional Grey really does cover a lot of the key facts that are really, really important. You can find it in different locations on BitChute, YouTube. There is one on YouTube. In fact, I sent you a copy of it on WhatsApp.
All right. Okay, fine. I'll look for that and I'll put a link up. Okay, fine. So I'm going to wrap up now because I'm absolutely freezing. Is there anything else we haven't covered?
The thing is, right, if you look at the number of weather modification projects, you'll begin at least to get a scope of the worldwide interest into it, historical interest into it. Then when you start to look at the issues of climate change and globalization, it begins to make sense what the motivations are and why they're doing it.
Which are, in a nutshell?
They want total control and a change in the way the world is run, a new world order. They don't like the idea of democracy. Democracy doesn't work for them. It's an obstacle for them. That was stated by the Club of Rome. In fact, the idea of global warming actually used by the Club of Rome. I think it was written about in their 1991 publication, First Global Revolution. They say that the common enemy of humanity is man. I can't actually quote it off the top of my head, and my copy is at the other house, but you can easily bring up the quote. They were looking for a reason to create a global issue that would bring mankind all together. And in searching, they thought that the threat of global warming, water shortages and famine would fit the bill, because all these different issues are affecting mankind, that basically humanity itself becomes the enemy.
I know all about this, and I don't know, it's a very Malthusian, and I don't know if they believe it or not. Right, Max, tell me, what's this all about?
Well, this patent is by a man called Vladimir Sorokin. He was the head of RCA, which is a big corporation in America. And he's also a man who drew out an outline proposal for weather control. There's another thing to look up at a later date. But this particular patent, he filed for the patent in 1948, but it wasn't published until 1962, I think, or 63. And the reason for that was the DOD, the Department of Defense, had put a secrecy order on it. So part of this patent, do you want me to start reading that? Okay. The information obtained by the present method and means may be used for the control of cloud movements to affect certain weather changes. If two clouds which have been found to have similar charges are brought close by elevating one by spraying it with graphite or other finely divided heat-absorbing particles, or lowering it by spraying it with metallic or other heat reacting particles, the two clouds will repel each other horizontally. By this means, large clouds and air masses may be moved in a desired manner. By bringing together two clouds which have been found to have opposite charges, a large-scale electric disturbance and precipitation may be obtained. So already here we have an example of where what I was saying to you earlier on about the clouds being electrically charged, how they can move air masses by altering the electrical charge, by spraying metallic particles or graphite, which is carbon, soot. This was known in 1948.
Wow. And that sounds like what they're talking about is creating thunderstorms, lightning and rain, huge storms.
Yes, all clear in the sky.
So who knows what else they are doing? I've heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, that they have threatened other countries, developing countries, with earthquakes, floods, and droughts if the government doesn't do what America wants them to do, for example. I've heard, like for example, in Pakistan, some Pakistani politicians have said, if we don't do what America tells us, we will have the mother of all monsoons, massive flooding, millions will die, and our crops will be devastated, and the government will be overthrown. So we have to do what they tell us to. I mean, is this real?
Yeah. In 1967, I think it was 1967, LBJ, I think both Pakistan and India, he offered to alleviate their drought problems. And of course, it's not because he's a nice, friendly guy. It's because he wants something. Everything they do, has strings attached to it. So I think that's quite a good example. You need to bring it up. You need to look for that. LBJ offers drought relief to Pakistan 1967, I think. Of course, when you look into that furthermore, then you'll find out that there was geopolitical reasons.
And what about, but is it the opposite as well, that America has created floods and everything and created damage?
Well, they certainly did in Vietnam. They were doing it in Cuba. These are declassified. Obviously, Operation Popeyes gets a lot of publicity. They were creating floods. I think the more they did it in Cuba. They were trying to destroy their sugarcane crops. It's been done for a very, very long time. The interesting thing about it, of course, it's apart from not having to, for a military point of view or geostrategic point of view, you don't physically have to put troops there or make an attack. There's always this element of plausible deniability with weather warfare. So it's very appealing to them to be able to do that remotely because they can deny it. But in the back room, they know what's going on, and people are able to make deals. But publicly, they can just deny it.
Yeah. I can't find anything about Lyndon Johnson and offering drought relief. All I can see is that there was a drought in India, and he was offering aid, but he was critical. He was retaliating with the Indians because India was critical of the US's role in the Vietnam War,
Yeah. No, well, I've definitely read it before. The LBJ offered them drought relief, but it was, I think in the text I was reading, it was an example of geophysical leverage. And I would imagine that they probably created the drought by dropping all the monsoons earlier in Vietnam. They've upset the monsoon season in India so that they were having a drought. There is an example. I'll have to search for it. I've definitely read it. It's clear in my mind. LBJ offered them drought relief by doing weather modification.
Okay, I found something else. Actually. So, let's see if I can get this up. This is an article, War of the Weathers, 1976. War of the Weathers. Santa Monica. From space, one could control the Earth's weather, cause droughts and floods, change the tides and raise the levels of the sea, make temperature climates frigid. Then Senator Lyndon B. Johnson told a joint session of Congress in 1957.
Yeah.
Wow. Like many other legislators, he accepted Defense Department fantasies that the United States was in race with the Soviet Union to develop environmental weapons. Mr. Johnson, as president, made the fantasies real by ordering rainmaking in Southeast Asia between 1967 and 1972. He and President Richard Nixon authorized at least $3.6 million annually on secret cloud seeding over North and South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in an attempt to muddy trails and slow enemy movements. Although in one instance this enhanced rainfall by 30%, Pentagon officials called the operations a failure. Of course they would. But the Pentagon defends them as humane, saying raindrops don't kill people, bombs do. The Department of Defense denies it was seeding over North Vietnam in 1971, when the nation suffered its heaviest rain since 1945. In 1945, 1 million Vietnamese died of flood and famine. Can a nation that tampers with natural balances deny responsibility for what follows? This question, together with recognition that the United States policy condemns warfare aimed at civilians, prompted Senator Claiborne Pell in 1973 to introduce a resolution calling for an international treaty to prohibit environmental warfare or the carrying out of any research or experimentation directed thereto. The Senate voted 82-10 to approve the resolution, which lacks force of law. Wow. There you go.
And in that particular convention, there are no restrictions about doing weather modification over your own territory. It's only a restriction to use it as a hostile weapon against a different country.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. Wow. Look, so in summary, geoengineering is truly alive and kicking. There are multiple ways of doing it. The most common is through fuel composition changes in normal jet planes. I read somewhere else as well, I didn't share the screen, but flights have gone up 8-fold in the last 4 decades. So there's just a lot more planes in the sky. So that's why we're seeing all the crisscross gridding. And these chemtrails can cool the planet and warm the planet depending on the composition and the levels. And weather modification is real. And sadly, a lot of what they put in the fuel mixture and everything is aluminium. It's also to allow the fuel to burn better and more efficiently.
In the biofuels, yeah. In the sustainable fuel.
But the problem is it damages and poisons everything that it falls onto.
To have all the patents for replacement aluminium resilient crops. I didn't tell you as well that I was talking to a climate scientist. I know you're trying to wrap up. So I was talking to a scientist in Francisco at the AAAS conference in 2015. He said to me that he had been to a session where they were talking about nanomedicines being used to remove aluminium from the body, like a chelation, but for the brain. So they have these nanomedicines that can go in, collect up aluminium oxides and remove them from the body.
Oh, man. Indoctrinated brain. So basically, just for everyone listening, wondering, why is Ahmed wanting to wrap this up? We're both freezing cold. We're both in freezing properties, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes, Mac. And I'm hoping most people won't notice, but the reality is we've done about 10 different recordings. I'm going to have to edit the hell out of this. The internet connection has been awful. The audio's been awful. The screen's been freezing every 5 seconds.
We're shivering.
We're shivering. I'm going to have to edit this like mental. It's going to take me a whole weekend, and I'd rather be doing other things than do this. And yeah, so I'm going to try and edit this so that by the time people listen to it, they'll be like, "Oh, why did Ahmed wrap up?" Like it was like, well, yeah, because it was just really difficult. And hopefully one day you'll be in my studio and we'll have a proper chat. But look, yeah, thanks. Thanks, man. And people should know that this isn't the first time we've tried to do a podcast, is it?
No. I think, is this the third time? No, second time we've sat in and done this, but we've talked a lot in the past.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Listen, Max, I know you probably got more to say, but you've also told me you're quite rusty because you were very much into this for a long time, but then you turned your back and walked away and just started doing your own stuff and getting on with life. I mean, I wanted you to be able to share screens and everything, but your computer's really old and you're not.
I don't even know how to do that.
It's not hard. It's not, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, listen, Max, final question of the day. You're on your deathbed, could be next week. Before you die and pass away and meet your maker, what words of wisdom and advice would you give to your loved ones?
Know yourself. Everyone really needs to understand themselves before they can understand what's going on in the world.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes people live a life they think they want to live, but they don't know who they really are. And I think that if you really understand who you are, you're then free to give yourself for other things. Basically, life is tough, but if you can sort out all your own problems, you can then start trying to sort out other problems. So basically, you've got to know yourself, and then once you know yourself, you don't have to question yourself. You don't have to worry whether or not you're right or wrong because you've been honest with yourself. Integrity is everything, which of course a lot of the people that we're trying to expose they don't have integrity. So it's important.
Well, that is amen to that. I played that clip, remember, of my previous guest, Alex Creel. I think this is a good time to play it again. It was all about integrity and why people in authority haven't got it. So let's play this.
First time maybe in history, a real-life Milgram experiment. Every one of those bastards came out and pushed the agenda. Every one of them. Nobody with integrity will have a position of authority.
Yes.
Because it cannot be manipulated so easily. Therefore, the system will always filter those people out. They don't want people with integrity anywhere in positions of power. They want hucksters, charlatans, liars, pedophiles, narcissists, drug takers, whoever they can get who can be bought off in whatever poison that they like to take, money, children, whatever they want. That's who they want in power. And that's the curse of our system because those people can often talk a great game. Like we said before, they will hit the emotional hot buttons. They will garner support. They talk a good game. And that's who a lot of the herd will go after because they talk a good game and they're prepared to ignore what these guys actually do. And such a simple rule, judge a person based on what they've done. It's so simple. Nobody does it.
That was a really good rant. Dude, that was epic. So epic. And you nailed it, my friend. At the end of the day, you know what? They're all con artists. And they're good. That's what you said, isn't it? Have integrity. Know yourself.
I think it's the most important thing, really. Then you can survive anything, really. You don't have to live with any regrets. You've got a solid base. It's the most important thing. At the end of the day, all these people that have been working on these agendas for decades, if not centuries, they don't have integrity. If you are going to put yourself in the spotlight, you are going to be scrutinized. You are going to be attacked. And, if you are honest, if you've got integrity, first of all, you resonate that you're speaking the truth, which I think is important. But you've just got to know yourself because everyone's got their faults, everyone's got their issues. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but at least if you know yourself and you have integrity, then you're solid.
I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks. You know, my die-hard supporters, like the fans who stay to the bitter end, listen to the outro music and everything. This is for them. Right. Tell me about, what do you think of Trump and everything? What were you saying?
You asked me if I was a Trump supporter, because we've been talking about him before. And I said, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I had high hopes that he would pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement and help derail the climate change, which, maybe he might. And he's taken them out, or going to take them out of the World Health Organization, which would also be good. And he's destroying the gender thing, which would also be good. But I think that I'm probably going to alienate myself from some people, but I think he's controlled opposition. And I think that Kamala Harris was a spoiler candidate that was deliberately put out there. I think they engineered situations so that Biden was there for the primary, so he was the candidate, and then he obviously, his old age state meant that he had to drop out after that first debate with Trump, and Kamala was automatically the candidate to go forward. I think she was a spoiler candidate. The elites, the billionaire class, have created a situation where the Democrats were so unpopular that Trump, there's no question about Trump getting in this time. So it was all part of a long-term behavioural science operation to get Trump in place, because he's got work to do. He's going to transform the US into a technocracy. He's appointed lots of tech billionaires into his government as advisors, and he gets a lot of funding from them, and likely to bring in digital currencies and taxes. That's what Elon Musk wants. He's basically going to bring in the next level of technocracy. I think that's part of his role. And, of course, his role in the Middle East is supporting Israel to do all to complete the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and Palestinian territories.
Well, it's actually insane.
Yeah, it's very much insane, isn't it, really?
Look at this. I just saw this on my timeline this morning, and I was just like, what the hell? This is Donald Trump. He goes, the Gaza Strip would be turned over to the United States by Israel at the conclusion of fighting. The Palestinians, people like Chuck Schumer, would have already been resettled in... Who is Chuck Schumer? Why is he mentioning Chuck Schumer?
Chuck Schumer is the head of the Democratic Party.
Is he Palestinian?
No, he's American.
So why is he saying the Palestinians, people like Chuck Schumer, would have already been resettled in a far safer and more beautiful communities with new and modern homes in the region? So they're not going back home.
He's hoping to push them into Jordan and Egypt.
They would actually have a chance to be happy, safe and free. The US, working with great development teams from all over the world, would slowly and carefully begin the construction of what would become one of the greatest and most spectacular developments of its kind on Earth. No soldiers by the US would be needed. Stability for the region would reign. Is that not just completely annexing and taking over land? And and what I should say, my response to that was, but this isn't your land. It's not your land to take. It's not your land to give. But Trump is pushing ahead the mRNA agenda, the digital infrastructure control grid for the technocracy, and he's taking land that wasn't his to take, like a good little Zionist colonialist that he is. Yet still so many think that Donnie is one of the good guys. Donnie's one of us.
Nah.
Honestly, I think Jesus is weeping as we speak. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And there's no mention of the oil and gas deposits off the coast of Gaza there that would belong
to the Leviathan field. Yes, 500 billion plus.
Which would rightfully belong to the Palestinian people. But if they'd been moved off their land and the territory annexed and turned into a Riviera, as Kushner suggested, you could have wonderful properties there. Kushner being Donald's son-in-law.
Son-in-law, yeah, it's crazy. They're openly talking about ethnic cleansing and it's just it's crazy. And then you talk about America First movement. No. What Detroit, New Orleans, Baltimore? They don't need regeneration. They don't need the money. San Francisco, LA, all the homelessness in America. Where's all the money being spent to develop America and put America first? But of course it's not. It's always Israel first.
Yes.
But the MAGA firsters, America First people have been brainwashed into thinking the psyop that, in getting Trump, they're getting America first when actually it was always Israel first. There's always technocracy first. It's the biggest psyop ever. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. I think that if you look at lobbyists in America and congressmen, there was a congresswoman called Cynthia McKinney who revealed that she was told she would have to sign a pledge to support Israel to carry on getting funding. And she was a bit of a whistleblower there. Basically, virtually all the members of Congress have made a pledge that it is Israel first.
Crazy. What do you think of that?
I think it goes on everywhere. These lobby groups are so financially persuasive, shall we say, that I don't think there isn't a government that isn't lobbied and controlled. I mean, you only have to look at the UK, for example, and what happened to Corbyn. I'm not saying I support Corbyn. I think Corbyn's a great bloke or whatever, but he did speak out about the rights for Palestinians, and they tried to slur him as anti-Semitic, and they railroaded him out. So, yeah, I think you only have to, in the UK, look at Friends of Israel, whether it's Conservative Friends for Israel, Labour Friends of Israel, any political party, Friends of Israel, whatever it is.
Is that a bad thing to be friends? I mean, isn't it a good thing to be friends with everybody?
Friends, yes. In the pocket of? No. It's. You have to question your loyalty, don't you? It's. You only have to look at everything that has been said by the Conservatives or the Labour government about what's happening with the catastrophe in Gaza. Even the European Union, they were putting images of the Israeli flag onto European Union buildings immediately afterwards. You don't have to look very far to find out where the allegiances are. So I don't know. I don't know what happens on these Friends of Israel tours that they do, but there are some people do talk about it. There are some articles about it, and I wouldn't say that they're cajoled or brainwashed, but it's like a nice little gentle club. If you look after us, we'll look after you.
I just find the whole thing bizarre. Like, can you imagine? I mean, the funny thing is not even Gaza; it's Gaza. It's like, imagine the Chinese took over not just Hong Kong but Britain, and then called London. And we'd be like, it's not London, it's London. So it's not Gaza. That's what we call it. It's Gaza. Yeah. Okay. And then the next thing is, and imagine they this other foreign country just takes over, like England. And then goes, actually, we'll give you the North. We'll give you Wales. We'll let you keep Wales. And then eventually they find out there's gas and oil, or outside of Wales. So then they take Wales and they go, you can go live in France or Ireland. You're white. They're white. They're Christians. You're Christians. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And you're like, no, you just kicked us out of our home. But that's what it's like. I mean, the idea that all Arabs are the same is so not true. They just happen to speak the same language, which actually varies quite a lot depending on whether you're in Egypt or the Gulf Arab states. But ethnically, racially, the Arabs, for example, from Saudi Arabia are very different from the Arabs from Palestine, are very different from the Arabs in Iraq, from Morocco.
Also different religiously, aren't they? Aren't they Sunni and Shia?
Yeah, and even within the Sunni, there's different variations of it. And the funny thing is, there were a lot of Christian Arabs, and these are the original people, the Semitic people from that area, right? The oldest groups of Christians in the world, and the West has ethnically cleansed the Christians out of the Middle East. I've got Christian Arab friends. Mm-hmm. They tell me this, and they go, we're Orthodox Christians or Orthodox Armenian or Orthodox whatever. And, we've just been ethnically cleansed out of our countries, all by the backing of the West. And it's like, no one ever talks about this. There's a war on Christianity.
Yes.
It's just crazy. It's crazy. And then Christian Zionists are like supporting all of this, and they don't actually even understand. They've been given the Schofield Bible and this weird idea about what God wants. And like I said, Jesus, a Palestinian, a Semite, is weeping. It's like, what is going on? What are you guys up to? It's crazy, man. The whole world is just inverted, inverted.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, that we could actually do another talk on this, but delicate territory.
But I'm not chatting to you again unless it's in person, Buster. So next time you're passing my neck of the woods, you can come here. All right. Okay. God bless you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Get that nice picture for me. Everyone listening right to the bitter end, I love you loads. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this. Max, did you enjoy it?
It's a real shame that the internet wasn't working. My computer's rubbish. I would like it to be better for you and your audience.
It's going to be great. I'll work some magic. Don't worry about it. All right. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.